With one blunt sentence, Michael O'Leary lit a fuse under the aviation industry when he casually remarked that the Chinese are basically building the A320 and admitted that Ryanair would seriously consider buying it if the price was right. It didn't sound like a press stunt. It sounded like a warning. For decades, commercial aviation has revolved around a simple reality. Airlines choose between Boeing or Airbus, and that's it. But suddenly, that assumption feels shakier than it has in years. And the most disruptive part isn't the aircraft itself, it's who's talking about buying it. Ryanair isn't just any airline floating a hypothetical. It's Europe's most aggressive cost-cutter, an operator that built its entire empire on squeezing every last euro out of aircraft deals. When O'Leary speaks, manufacturers listen. That's why this moment matters. Because if Ryanair is openly entertaining a Chinese-built jet, even as a possibility, it signals something deeper is shifting beneath the surface of the industry. This wasn't curiosity. It was leverage behind the scenes. Ryanair is riding a wave of demand few airlines could have predicted just a few years ago. Passenger numbers are climbing, bookings are coming in earlier than usual, and peak travel periods are selling out fast. Families are locking in holidays months in advance, and planes that once flew half empty during uncertain times are now consistently full. On paper, Ryanair looks unstoppable, but growth like this comes with a problem that money alone can't solve. You need airplanes, and lots of them. That's where the pressure starts to show. Airbus is sold out for years. Boeing is still untangling production challenges and trust issues. Delivery slots that airlines use to negotiate aggressively are now treated like rare currency for a carrier that thrives on rapid expansion and fleet renewal. Waiting until the end of the decade isn't just inconvenient, it's a competitive threat. Ryanair doesn't want planes eventually, it wants them now, and the traditional suppliers are struggling to deliver. This is the gap where China quietly steps in. The COMAC C919 wasn't designed to be revolutionary. It wasn't meant to reinvent flight. It was built with a far more dangerous goal: to be good enough, comparable size, familiar range, similar operating economics. On paper, it mirrors the Airbus A320 closely enough that airlines immediately know where it fits. And for a company like Ryanair, that familiarity matters more than flashy innovation. The aircraft's layout works for high-density seating. Its range covers the vast majority of Ryanair's routes. Even the engines aren't some untested experiment. The C919 uses CFM LEAP engines, a family already well known across Western fleets. That kind of commonality reduces training headaches, maintenance surprises, and operational risk. It's not perfect. It doesn't need to be. It just needs to be viable. And that's what makes it uncomfortable for the established giants. But performance isn't the real hook. Price is. O'Leary didn't mince words when he suggested that if the jet came in 10 to 20% cheaper than Airbus, Ryanair would be interested. In an industry where margins are thin and scale is everything, that kind of discount isn't small, it's disruptive, especially when paired with something even more valuable: availability. While Airbus and Boeing juggle massive backlogs, COMAC can promise earlier delivery windows. For a fast-growing airline, time is money. And waiting years for aircraft is a luxury Ryanair doesn't like to afford. There's also another layer, quietly boosting COMAC's appeal. Reports suggest generous state-backed financing, bundled support packages, training assistance, and long-term maintenance guarantees. This isn't just about selling a plane, it's about lowering the psychological barrier of adopting a new manufacturer. Airbus once used a similar playbook when it challenged Boeing decades ago. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it does have a habit of rhyming. Still, this story isn't as simple as Ryanair switching suppliers overnight. There's a massive obstacle standing in the way, and everyone in aviation knows it. The C919 is not yet certified by Western regulators like EASA or the FAA without that approval. The aircraft can't operate commercially in Europe. Optimistic timelines suggest the late 2020s at best, and that's assuming everything goes smoothly. In aviation, that's a big assumption. On top of certification, there's politics. Operating a Chinese-built aircraft in Western markets isn't just a technical decision, it's a geopolitical one. Supply chains, spare parts, access, regulatory oversight, and diplomatic tensions all come into play. Airlines are conservative by nature, and for good reason. Reliability and predictability matter more than novelty. That's why many industry watchers believe Ryanair isn't actually planning to place an order anytime soon, and that's where the real strategy reveals itself. O'Leary has a long history of using public statements as negotiation tools. He applies pressure in the open, forces uncomfortable conversations, and reshapes the bargaining table before contracts are ever signed. Notably, his comparison wasn't aimed at Boeing, it was aimed squarely at Airbus. That choice wasn't accidental. By positioning the C919 as an A320 alternative, he's signaling dissatisfaction with Airbus pricing, delivery flexibility, or both. This kind of signaling serves multiple purposes at once. It reminds Airbus that its dominance isn't untouchable. It tells Boeing that loyalty has limits, and it signals to investors that Ryanair is proactive, flexible, and willing to challenge industry norms to protect its cost advantage. Even if Ryanair never takes delivery of a single Chinese jet, the message alone has value. It changes the conversation. What makes this moment so fascinating is that COMAC doesn't actually need Ryanair to commit. The mere fact that Europe's largest low-cost carrier is willing to talk about the C919 legitimizes it in a way marketing campaigns never could. It forces Airbus and Boeing to respond, whether publicly or quietly, behind closed doors. Pricing models get delivery promises get sharper, negotiations get more tense. There's also a longer game unfolding. If certification eventually comes through and geopolitical tensions ease even slightly, the presence of a third serious competitor in the single-aisle market would permanently alter the balance of power. Airlines would have leverage they haven't enjoyed in decades. Manufacturers would have to compete harder, not just on technology, but on economics and relationships. That possibility alone is enough to make executives nervous. For Ryanair, this isn't about breaking tradition. It's about preserving its edge. The airline has never been sentimental about suppliers. Loyalty lasts only as long as the numbers make sense. By openly acknowledging interest in the C919, O'Leary reinforces a core truth about Ryanair's strategy. Nothing is off the table if it protects margins and fuels growth. So will Ryanair actually be flying Chinese-built jets by the end of the decade? That remains uncertain. Certification timelines, political realities, and operational risks all stand in the way. But the more important question might be whether it even needs to, because right now, the threat alone is doing its job. It's shaking assumptions, shifting leverage, and reminding the aviation world that even the strongest duopolies can be challenged when pressure builds in the right places. And that's what makes this moment bigger than one airline or one aircraft. It's a glimpse at how disruption really begins, not with a dramatic announcement, but with a single, calculated sentence that forces everyone else to rethink their position. That single sentence has already done what years of industry speculation failed to do. It made the idea of a third major aircraft supplier feel real. Not inevitable, not imminent, but possible. And in an industry as conservative as aviation, possibility is enough to shift behavior. Manufacturers don't wait for contracts to be signed before they react, they move when leverage changes. And right now, leverage is quietly tilting. For Airbus, the message is uncomfortable but clear. Being the default alternative to Boeing is no longer guaranteed. If pricing stays rigid and delivery slots remain locked deep into the next decade, airlines like Ryanair will keep looking for pressure points. For Boeing, the warning is just as sharp. Loyalty built over decades can erode quickly when reliability, timing, and economics fall out of sync. Ryanair has never hidden the fact that its partnerships are transactional, not emotional. As for COMAC, this moment represents something far bigger than a potential order. It's credibility. For years, the C919 was discussed mostly in technical circles and domestic Chinese aviation. Now it's part of a global conversation involving Europe's most influential low-cost carrier. That alone shifts perception. It tells the industry that China's ambitions aren't theoretical anymore. They're knocking on the door. Even if that door hasn't opened yet. Of course, reality will eventually catch up with rhetoric. Certification timelines will be tested. Political headwinds may intensify. Operational concerns won't disappear just because a jet is cheaper. Ryanair knows all of that, which is why this moment feels less like a buying decision and more like a masterclass in strategic pressure. O'Leary didn't promise anything. He didn't commit. He simply let the industry imagine a future it wasn't ready for. And sometimes, that's more powerful than action. Whether Ryanair ever flies the C919 isn't the only thing that matters. What matters is that Airbus and Boeing now have to negotiate, knowing there might be another option one day. That alone reshapes the balance of power. It forces flexibility. It injects uncertainty into what was once a comfortable duopoly. So when people ask if Ryanair will actually take delivery of a Chinese-built jet in the late 2020s, the honest answer is simple. Maybe, maybe not. But by raising the question publicly, Ryanair has already won something valuable. It's reminded the aviation world that no position is permanent, no supplier is untouchable, and no market stays closed forever. And if history has taught this industry anything, it's that real disruption rarely arrives with noise and celebration. It starts quietly, with one sentence that everyone wishes they could ignore, but can't. What happens next will likely unfold behind closed doors rather than in headlines. Quiet meetings, revised spreadsheets, phone calls that suddenly feel more urgent than they did a year ago. That's how pressure really works in this industry. Not through public announcements, but through subtle shifts in tone when contracts are discussed. And right now, Ryanair has managed to change that tone without signing a single new deal. There's also a psychological element at play that's easy to overlook. For decades, airlines adapted their strategies around the assumption that only to manufacturers truly mattered. Training pipelines, maintenance infrastructure, long-term fleet planning, all of it was built around that reality. By even entertaining the idea of a third option, Ryanair is challenging more than pricing. It's challenging mindset. And once that door cracks open, it's hard to fully close again. This is especially important in a market where demand is no longer the problem. Capacity is. Airports are crowded, routes are profitable, and passengers are flying again in numbers that feel almost defiant given the economic uncertainty. In that environment, aircraft availability becomes the bottleneck. Whoever can deliver planes reliably and affordably gains influence. Ryanair understands this better than most, and it's why the delivery timeline matters just as much as the sticker price. That's also why this moment feels different from past speculation about new entrants. This isn't about futuristic designs or experimental technology that might pay off someday. It's about a jet that already exists, already flies, and already does the job well enough. The barrier isn't imagination anymore, it's timing, trust, and approval. And those are challenges that can shrink faster than people expect when enough money and pressure are involved. Airbus and Boeing both know this. They've seen challengers before. They know how quickly narratives can shift when airlines start publicly questioning assumptions. Even if COMAC never captures a large share of the Western market, its presence alone forces discipline. It limits complacency. It reminds incumbents that dominance is maintained, not guaranteed. For Ryanair, that's the entire point. The airline doesn't need to gamble recklessly or bet its future on an unproven path. It just needs options, or at least the credible appearance of them. Options keep suppliers honest. Options keep costs down. And options ensure that when the next cycle of negotiations begins, Ryanair isn't walking into the room empty-handed. So the story isn't really about whether Chinese-built jets will soon line European runways. It's about how quickly the balance of power can shift when one influential player decides to question the rules out loud. Today, it's a comment. Tomorrow, it's leverage. And somewhere down the line, it might be a contract nobody expected. Until then, the aviation world will keep listening closely. Because when someone like O'Leary speaks this openly, it's rarely just talk. It's a signal. And signals like this tend to echo far longer than the headlines they first appear in. That change in conversation may end up being the most lasting impact of all. Aviation moves slowly on the surface, but beneath it, decisions are constantly being recalibrated. Every major fleet plan is built years in advance, yet influenced by moments like this, moments where certainty cracks just enough to let doubt in. And doubt is dangerous for incumbents because it forces them to defend positions they once took for granted. What makes Ryanair's move especially effective is how little it actually had to say. There was no formal announcement, no roadmap, no promise. Just a comparison, just a price range, just enough to make manufacturers, regulators, and competitors stop and think. That restraint is what gives the statement weight. It feels deliberate, not emotional, strategic, not reactive. There's also a broader signal being sent to the market about adaptability. Airlines that survive long-term are the ones willing to rethink assumptions before they're forced to. Ryanair has never waited for comfort before acting. It expanded aggressively when others hesitated, negotiated ruthlessly when others played safe, and standardized its fleet when flexibility was considered risky. This latest move fits that same pattern. It's not about breaking rules for attention. It's about testing how firm those rules really are. For COMAC, the opportunity is clear, even if the path is steep. Western certification remains the biggest hurdle, and progress will be scrutinized at every step. Any misstep will be amplified. Any delay will be used as proof that the aircraft isn't ready. But if that approval ever arrives, the psychological barrier will already be weakened. The hardest part isn't building the plane. It's being taken seriously. And moments like this help. Airbus and Boeing, meanwhile, face a familiar dilemma. Respond too aggressively, and they legitimize the threat. Ignore it, and they risk letting uncertainty grow. Somewhere in between lies the real response: quieter concessions, subtle flexibility, and deals that never make headlines. That's where this story is likely headed. Not toward a dramatic break, but toward a gradual recalibration of power. So, while the public debate focuses on whether Ryanair will ever actually fly a Chinese-built aircraft, the more important shifts are already happening out of sight. Negotiations are tightening. Assumptions are being questioned. And an industry that once felt comfortably divided between two giants is being reminded that no structure lasts forever without pressure. In that sense, this wasn't just a comment about airplanes. It was a reminder of how disruption really works in mature industries. Not through sudden collapse, but through slow, deliberate erosion of certainty. And Ryanair, true to form, is once again proving that you don't need to change the game overnight to force everyone else to play differently, and that erosion of certainty is exactly what keeps dominant players awake at night. Because once alternatives start being discussed openly, even hypothetically, the illusion of inevitability disappears. Airbus and Boeing didn't become giants overnight, and they won't lose their position overnight either. But history shows that dominance weakens long before market share does. It weakens the moment customers stop believing there's only one path forward. Ryanair understands this better than almost anyone. It doesn't need to burn bridges or make dramatic bets to get results. It just needs to remind its suppliers that dependence cuts both ways. For years, manufacturers knew Ryanair needed planes. Now, Ryanair is quietly reminding them that manufacturers also need customers willing to place massive orders and on tough terms. That shift alone changes the tone of every future negotiation. What's especially striking is how calm this disruption feels. There's no panic, no urgency in O'Leary's words. Just a matter of fact acknowledgement that options exist, or could exist, under the right conditions. That calmness is intentional. It suggests confidence. Confidence that Ryanair can wait, apply pressure, and let others react. In business, that's often the strongest position to be in. As the years unfold, the industry will keep debating certification timelines, political tensions, and operational realities. Analysts will argue over feasibility. Commentators will dismiss or exaggerate the threat. But beneath all of that noise, one thing will remain true. The idea of a closed duopoly has been publicly challenged by one of the most influential airlines in the world. And once that happens, the conversation can't be undone. So whether the future brings Chinese-built jets to European runways or simply more competitive deals from familiar manufacturers, this moment will still matter. It marks a point where assumptions were questioned out loud. Leverage shifted quietly, and the balance of power nudged ever so slightly. In industries like aviation, that's often how the biggest changes begin. Not with a revolution, but with a calculated pause, followed by everyone else adjusting their stance. And if there's one thing Ryanair has proven time and again, it's that forcing others to adjust has always been part of the plan.